a lot of materials. Speaking of fun mail, I brought a lot of materials. And it was fun actually revisiting some of my favorite campaigns. And one I did with Dottie, which was, oh, we didn't do it with Dottie because they had our own campaign. That's right. But I mean, it was Shirley Zane's campaign, and for supervisor of Sonoma County. And what I brought, apart from the individual flyers and stuff that we did as labor, are some of the attacks that labor candidates get. This was one that was done by Herb Williams against Shirley. They basically tried to brand her as the bought and paid for by the unions, and it says, "Don't let them pump you dry. No group knows how to pump county government dry better than SEIU, one of the most powerful unions in the nation." And then their candidate, who doesn't listen to the union, and our candidate, who does whatever the unions say. So I think, you know, there's issues when you look at working with unions and working with labor people. There's, you know, a variety and a myriad of ways that labor works with candidates. It can be the most basic, and a lot of it is determined for us in labor by whether or not it's a targeted race. The labor council that I belong to, and on all of the labor councils in the state and in the country, are basically the county arm of the AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO is one of the largest and oldest labor organizations. And it consists of, you know, basically everything from nurses, ironworkers, teachers, AFSCME, state municipal workers, SEIU, which is currently still belongs to the labor councils, but is also part of another organization called Change to Win. So labor is like, as I was thinking about it, it's like coming to a strange country if you haven't been in a union or you haven't, don't have experience with it. It's like, think of it as labor stand. It's very tribal. We've also been described as a family. Labor is a family, like the Borgias or like the Manson family. No, we do fight a lot. We don't always agree. Everyone's issues don't always, you know, coincide nicely. And for example, the case with Target, right, and the D-cell plant, and Marin CCA. These are all issues where labor has a stake, but the different constituencies within labor are not always in agreement, and that can make it really hard for us. And that's also why we really expect and need smart candidates, good candidates, and very well-educated candidates. One of the first things, if you're not familiar with labor or you're only, you know, mildly familiar, I would suggest that you go to the AFL-CIO website, and then also go to the State Federation of Labor website. And you know, that'll teach you a little bit about how many different labor unions there are. And you should also find out a little bit about labor history. But that also makes a difference to us. We don't want a candidate that will just vote right or, you know, vote for pro-family issues. We really expect a champion of working people. And as a lot of you know, right, we're definitely under attack. Labor has consistently been under attack. So for us, it's not ever just enough to have, you know, somebody who, this is what I get from a lot of candidates, right? Well, my door will always be open to you. The phone, you can always, you know, I'll always take your calls. That's really not, I mean, that's good, and that's kind of the basic requirement of almost any candidate and or electeds. But for those of us in labor, we expect a little more from our candidates, and we give a lot more for the folks that we help get elected. And there's a variety. Like I said, if at the very minimum, if you are a labor candidate, which generally consists of, we have a process, we interview everybody is open. Actually, before we even do a candidate interview, let me back up. We generally have a kind of labor 101 thing. So we invite every candidate who has been, who has filed in our targeted races. So whether this is assembly, state, all of the, you know, board of soups, city councils, and our labor council actually covers from Marin here all the way up to Lake and Mendocino. So Sonoma, Marin, Lake, Mendocino are all our districts. Humboldt has its own district, Napa Solano has its own labor council. But we basically do a kind of candidates 101 on labor. And we'll have a panel like this. We'll have folks from public unions and private unions. We'll have folks from the building trades. And we'll talk to people about what are common labor issues. We have people from the classified student schools, and also teachers, nurses, and everybody talks a little bit about what are their biggest issues, what are their biggest fights, what do they need help with, what are they trying to accomplish. And then we also talk about general labor issues, obviously pensions, bargaining, but also working conditions and also organizing drives. Because one of the things that we ask of our folks is that they be advocates not only for the labor movement, but for working families, but wherever people are actually fighting to unionize, fighting to have collective bargaining rights, we ask folks to be willing to support that and support people's rights to do that. So I'm just going to give you kind of a basic, at the very least, once you get endorsed, and we do a questionnaire, it's about 6 pages for our candidates. All of the organizations in our council will vote and interview the candidates. And it's not a huge, but it's not really tough, although some people are like, oh, your question, too many pages. But we ask about the issues that are relevant. If you're in a fire district or a school board, it's specific to those areas. But there's some general questions too. Would you cross a picket line? Would you use, labor printing? Make sure your stuff is printed labor. All those kind of questions. And then all of our labor council affiliates, which right now in our council we have over 75 affiliates. And that's everyone from SEIU 1000, which is the state government employees, to woodworkers, machinists. All of them attend. We have an executive board and a delegates meeting once a month, and those folks come and they actually do all of the work, and then they vote. As a staff person, I don't actually vote. So although I'm the person who does a lot of the work with candidates and gives them advice and technical assistance, the majority of our phoning and our phone banks and all of the resources that we put into our races happen through the local unions. So, that's, labor can be a very Byzantine thing. I just want to ask briefly, is anybody here from a union? Yay. Okay. And participated in a union? Okay. So it's a little bit less daunting, there we go, if you've done that. Because you can kind of see there are layers and levels. And the AFL-CIO is national all the way down to the county. But each union also has the same national structure. So there's an international. SEIU has an international. The electrical workers have an international. And then it all comes down locally. So when you're talking about fundraising or resources or independent expenditures, which we also do for candidates, it can be a little Byzantine. There's so many different layers. But you need to educate yourself. And we're totally willing to help our candidates do that. We want to arm them with not only the best techniques for running a successful campaign, but also the best information, because you definitely will get, there's some people out there that will attack you just for supporting working families. Certainly in the Democratic Party, that's something to be proud of. It should be something that every candidate is proud of, because labor unions and working families are the backbone of our country. For myself, I am trained as an attorney, but I actually came to this as a kid. My dad was undocumented from Michoacan, Mexico, and he came from, when he was 12, he crossed the desert quite a few times. He used to tell me stories about how he and his uncles came to work in the cotton fields in Arizona. Who knew there was cotton in Arizona? Texas, up here in the grapes and strawberries in Watsonville. And he told me a couple of times about how he almost died in the desert. They didn't have enough water. They'd run out of water. They were hallucinating. And they saw the immigration, and they were so thrilled. They were laughing with joy to be caught by the immigration, because they were really all afraid they were going to die. My father must have crossed about 12 times illegally. And eventually he was working in the fields, and he met my grandfather, my mother's father, who was a cement mason, had been a union organizer in mushroom plant. They did packing in Redwood City. And he helped my father, when my father married my mother, he helped him get into the laborers union. And then my dad became a Teamster. And our whole life changed. For my brother and I, we had health care. For the first time, I remember going to Kaiser at 8. We saved money, we could have a house. I went to law school, my brother went to college. I really saw firsthand what unions brought to people, first generation people, and how they brought us into the middle class. And I would like everyone to have that. Everyone deserves that. And it saddens me to see that slipping away. It saddens me to see people in a race to the bottom and pitting each other against the, other workers. Because the fact is, there was a time when, a lot of people could afford to live and raise their family on a union salary, buy a house, and you didn't have to work 3 jobs and scrabble every month to pay, and have everybody in the family working. So our goal is to get people back to that, to grow our unions, to grow our working people's movement. And the political arena is one of the ways we do it. It's not the only way, and believe me, there's plenty of debates within labor about whether we're better to spend our money organizing and working with ourselves and increasing our own power, or to keep giving money to candidates that we end up getting disappointed by. So that's kind of our little general spiel. I'm going to hand out some of these. I really hope people take a look at these, because they go from Shirley Zane's campaign, for example, was a hugely important campaign for Board of Supervisors for us. We spent almost, I would say, $500,000 between us and NCIU and some other organizations. We spent about $600,000. We did about 6 mailers. Well, this one we also did Ruth Birch, which we were not successful. We were so close against Efren Carrillo. Came within a couple hundred votes. And again, that was a problem. The other side had a very good issue, taxes, lack of taxes, or paying taxes on time. Some things you can't overcome, right? But we actually made the front page with our Fat Cat thing against Efren Carrillo. And what I'm really proud about with this Fat Cat, and people talk about negative campaigning, we'll talk a little bit more about that. This surfaced an issue that they really did not want to surface, which was the issue of Preservation Ranch, which is a huge development that they want to do out in West Sonoma County. Eric Koenig Schaefer and some of the folks who helped back Efren. And if nothing else, if this is the only thing we accomplished was to surface this issue and tag Efren with it, that was good, because what it did was it really raised the consciousness of an already pretty politicized and very protective of the environment group in the West County, but it also put him on notice. And now this project, it's a bunch of vineyards and casitas, are kind of like, what do you call them? They're luxury housing way out there on a water table, and also on a Native American burial site type place too. So, there's artifacts there. There's not a burial site, there's artifacts there. But we've kind of preempted this. When we polled on this polled so negative. It polled 75%. It was the only thing that equalized Efren against our candidate Ruth. Now, again, that happened. We put $20,000 into a poll for our candidates, because when we want to win, we have to invest the money to win the right way. And even though it did kill me to pay that much money, all of us to pay that much money, it was very worthwhile. We had an excellent group that polled, and the reason that Efren had been chosen as a candidate by the more conservative business interests in Santa Rosa was because he was the perfect poll-driven candidate himself. Very young, very handsome, Latino, also the son of folks who came here without documents. He had no past. He had no real negatives. He had not voted on anything. And so it really was hard work for us to find something to run against, to get him on. And luckily we did. Too bad we didn't win, but I have to say that is one of my favorite pieces of mail. And we did quite a few positive mails for. What we did was we alternated. I think we did 3 positives on Shirley and Maddie and Brew eventually, and then we did negatives as well, negative IE on their opponents. That's like the Cadillac of campaigns. That's like the campaign you want with its number 1 priority. Okay. But at the very minimum, and of course we phoned. We phoned over. I think we did over 15,000 phone calls, right? And walked. Did precinct walking. The 5th district is harder to walk. Shirley was incredible. She walked. I walked around the park with her. And now the other important thing is that as a candidate, the one thing you do not want to do with labor is let labor run your campaign. We'll run a campaign, and we'll run our campaign with our members. Our members overwhelmingly will vote, and they like to hear from us on voting. And depending on the district or the area, for example, in Shirley's district, 3rd district in Sonoma, I want to say we had almost 7,000, 8,000 labor voters. We had a huge amount of labor union members. So those are the people we were talking to. But Shirley didn't just rely on us to do the mail and phoning. She had her own grassroots, she was out there knocking doors. She was out there, phoning people. She had phone banks, I think, over at the neighborhood realty place. Yeah. I mean, she did it the way you're supposed to do it. It really does not work if you just say, oh, labor's going to take care of my, walk campaign. You need to have all that together. We did the same thing in the 4th district for Mike McGuire. And, again, we had a lot more than I thought labor. I thought that would be one of the smaller districts, but we do the polling, we do it all when it's a target race. But when it's a city council or something that we're not necessarily, making the huge priority, because we do have to pick and choose as well, at the very least, we will phone for you. I mean, you'll get like a tagline on our phone calls to our members, and we usually do at least 2. We also do a slate to each one of our members that will have your name on it, and it'll talk about you as the labor candidate. And it's great because a lot of our folks actually, they use this slate. I mean, these are the ones we did for Shirley's race. And, we did some measures, and, people keep it. They go to we're actually trying to get people to do more vote by mail. A lot of our members do. But at the very least, they'll get one of this, and then they'll also get the State Federation of Labor mails 2 slate cards, and we put our recommendations on there. It all goes by zip code in your area. So that's kind of like the bottom level support. Plus, we will meet with you, we will call with you, we will have you come speak to all of our locals. I mean, basically, we'll help you navigate as well any difficult issues. Shirley, for example, was against gambling. The casino in Roanoke Park, that's completely being built labor. There's a card check in it. It's also very, built very green. I went and saw the plans, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's a lot of Native American art, modern art. Frankly, I think it classes Roanoke Park up, and they're actually very lucky to have it. But obviously, it was a hugely divisive issue there. A lot of people were against it. A lot of people are against it. For us, it was, how could you possibly have a Walmart and every other, blight known to man in Roanoke Park, right? And you won't let in this casino. And the casino would be built union. All the workers would have union benefits. For us, that was the right way to build a project. Well, now, Shirley didn't agree with us on that issue, and we certainly weren't going to lose a good candidate on one issue where we disagreed. But what we were able to do was give her the language to talk positively about what was right with the project and still be able to stay true to her campaign and say, I don't support casinos. So she worked with seniors, she was against gambling. Although I told her many times, Shirley, the stock market is gambling as well. Casinos just gambling for poor people, but the stock market is gambling for rich people. And so she, but what she would say, what was very effective and what meshed with her beliefs as well as labor's goals was to say, if you are going to build a project, this is the way to build it. You know, I may not agree with this particular project, but the environmental mitigation, the project labor agreements, the local hire stuff, having, you know, workers have, you know, bargaining rights at work, that's what every developer should have coming in. You know, they ask, you know, it amazed me that they would ask so little of Walmart and Target and all these other groups. But the only people who were really willing to do something for the community in this in this area was the casino. And it actually worked out well for her. But we were able to give her that argument. And we would do that for any candidate because we want you to be successful. We also make recommendations. We'll help you look over your budget. We'll help you do some of the research in terms of if you need to find out, how many votes it's going to take to win. You need to look at the last elections. All those things are things we will help with if it's a targeted campaign. And so I'll just stop there and let Jonathan talk about IEs. We also do IEs, but I'm going to let him talk specifically about his stuff, and then we can take questions. Or if anybody has questions with me right now, we can answer.
Okay, thank you. You know, I love independent expenditures because it's an art form. Look at this thing on the fat cats. It is an art form. I've been involved in advertising since the late 70s, and that was around the time when it moved from what are called regular advertising to the kind of advertising you found in Andy Warhol's magazine Interview, which I remember one ad was a full-page ad. All it had was a pair of women's shoes and the address and phone. So you knew what they were selling and where it was. It was that simple. And this kind of it's a fun thing to be involved with, within certain restrictions. One of them is that I take a lot of these from Gotti. One of them, it has to be relevant. It has to speak to the candidate and their record. The second thing, it has to be substantiated. And so, therefore, doing research is very important. And the third thing, in the case, for example, of Richard Rubin from 7 years ago, and things have changed in them since then, it has to be timely. It coming in so late at the end of a campaign is just not okay. And now that we have people doing so many absentees, you want to get your message out around absentees time, which is a month before the campaign. Now, independent expenditure is like a person in the campaign. It's somebody who is able to spend as much as, or almost as much as the candidate, to be able to talk about the different candidates in the campaign. And they can do it in a supportive way, or what's called negative way. They can point out things about one candidate which would not be good for the job. But if you are a candidate running for office, you can't go and seek somebody to do an independent expenditure. You have to hope they show up in the scene and do it, because you can't link up, you can't coordinate. It's against the law to do that. At the state level, this is very important, because first of all, at the state level, assembly candidates and senate candidates have a contribution limit. They can only accept a certain amount of funds. And if they coordinate with somebody to do an IE, then that IE is subject to the same contribution limit. So that's one reason why you want to not do it. But the other thing is that I was talking to somebody from the MWPAC about this a year or two ago, and I can't remember why. I said, if there's no contribution limits, what's the problem with coordinating? Well, it just looks really bad. It looks really bad that for the person who is being supported by one, rather negatively or positively. Another issue is that, like I said, there's no limits to how much money you can take in or spend for an independent expenditure. It's just protected by the Supreme Court, the First Amendment, and so on. And so the good ones, the really good ones, the art form ones, will be well researched and look really good and have some sort of measure of humor in them, as well as if you want to present facts in a way that really gets the people to sit up and take notice. Let's see. The cost. The cost will depend on the size of the population. If you're in San Anselmo, probably not going to get an IE there because it's more in Fairfax. You've got 7,000 people you have to convince to vote one way or the other. What works there is a really good ground campaign in some air, or meaning mail. In San Rafael, it's different. The last race that was affected strongly by this was 4 years ago. Greg and Damon ran, and they were supported by IEs from the firefighters, and myself and another friend of mine, Doug Kerr, and a third friend in there as well. And that's about almost 30,000 voters you want to affect. And so we began to meet with the firefighters who were a little leery about getting into the race at first. And so the first one that came out was the one that they helped out on, and which I financed mostly. So they came in at about 40%, and I had about 60%. And this one just talked about the record, and it was substantiated. The second one that came out was all of theirs. They thought the little emboldened, this was all paid for by them. And so then we ran a poll. We ran a poll to find out, were these working? And we found that they were. We found that with about 3 weeks to go, that Marcucci, who was the presumed frontrunner, had his numbers drop to where he was tied for third, or he was just a percentage point above or below. And that was with Greg Rockbank, because Damon Connolly looks like he was going to win. And then, so then we had a fight. Me and the firefighters had a fight. Because they wanted to put out this one, and I wanted the hunk on mine. They got the hunk, and I put out this one here with no picture. So it wasn't really a fight, but it was a race where we saw that the absentees came in fairly strongly at the beginning for Brockbank, and as the night came on, it began to be much more of a separation. So it was one where the IEs definitely were had power in the race, because we spent about $40,000 or so, all told. Damon and Greg spent about 50, and Marcucci spent about 60. So we were right in there. We were, in effect, we were an extra person telling people, don't vote for this guy, vote for these two guys. And we didn't say don't vote for these two guys. We had to keep it, vote no on Marcucci, because we didn't want to see that we were being coordinated with Damon and Greg, and we weren't. So as a result of that race, the League of Women Voters decided to push forth on different ordinances. One of them, which would be about disclosure, which I'm all in support of, because when we've done IEs, we always go to the paper and say, hey, we're doing this. We don't hide who we are. And now all we have to do is just stick it on the mailer itself. There's a certain amount of, it has to be above a certain point size, it can't be below 10 points. You have to identify the top 3 funders and a couple other things. I can't remember what it is. The concern about the League of Women Voters, though, is that they've done it because they want to, quote unquote, restore civility. They don't like the negativity that's coming out. And that chills the freedom of speech. And when you have one of the proponents in the League of Women Voters telling my wife that they are pursuing this ordinance because of your husband, meaning me, then it's whose agenda is really being followed there. And the point is we want to get disclosure out there so that the voter is informed as to who is funding the IEs. But to think that you're going to stop, quote-unquote, negative campaigning is pie-in-the-sky thinking. It's not going to happen. Now, it was mentioned that public-funded campaigns would be discussed, and there's interaction between the independent expenditures and public-funded campaigns. When contribution limits came in to the state level in 2000, by 8 years or so later, this is now 3, maybe 4 years ago, they found that independent expenditures had increased by more than 6,000%, which means that people didn't want to put their money with the candidate anymore. They were going to go and put it in independent expenditures because that's where they could spend all the money if they want to get it out to support their candidate. And what really effectively moves that around is that is a publicly funded campaign. That means that the government entity for which you are running would actually give you funds to run your campaign. You as a candidate would only take those funds on a voluntary basis. You can do it one or two ways. You can say, I'll take no private funds, or you can link the two, where you would have partial funding. You would get some private funds, which would then trigger your public funds, at which point you probably stop your private funding fundraising. And you also get what are called fair fight funds, and which means that if you are hit with an IE, then you're given money to fight back. And that is the key which effectively can stop independent expenditures to a large degree. Because if somebody like myself, who is in a jurisdiction where we see publicly funded campaigns, it doesn't make any sense to go after anybody because they're going to get those fair fight funds, unless, of course, there's a lot of money. And that's the bugaboo we're up against now, is money. Let's see here. I lost my train of thought, but...
I wanted to just say one thing about what Jonathan is talking about, just in terms of the philosophy of IEs. We've done, as you guys can see, right, so we've done some hard-hitting negative IEs, but they are always about the issue or the record. Like, we would never do a campaign about somebody's sex life. I would never try to press people on their... I mean, I think there's a line, and I think that, in the last supervisorial race, we had the Business Alliance, the Sonoma Alliance, did a very negative mailer against Pam Torley that basically, it was a race baiting about immigrant and sanctuary. And to me, I was so disgusted with that, and actually had to call out one of the operating engineers who had given money to this. And he publicly apologized and said that that was not his intention, that he wasn't handling it. He didn't see the piece. Now, again, the Alliance's excuse was, number one, it wasn't bad. We weren't talking about anything to do with race. It was just about illegal immigrants, so it's okay. The second thing was none of us saw it. None of us saw it. Lisa Schaffner, all of them said, "Oh, we didn't see this. Somebody did it." Well, that's the point of an IE for a lot of folks, is to hide behind that, to not be able to do it. So Jonathan's coming out and saying, "This is what we're doing. This is a candidate. We're proud of it." To me, that's one of the ways to run it. The other thing, and I think this is true here in Marin and especially in Sonoma, is that some IEs can actually do a service. I think they do a service. When you have a paper, for us, the PD is definitely in the business, in the hands of the chamber and those business folks. They don't report on anything. The candidate who was running, that they supported and endorsed against, Shirley's name was Sharon Wright. She had been cited for conflict of interest by the FPPC and had big fines because while she was working on city council, she directed money to some of the folks that she was representing also as a consultant in the chamber. And, to me, if you have a paper that's not willing to really do what a newspaper is supposed to do in a race, an independent expenditure equalize that and actually give information.
That's a very good point. So I would have made that myself if I had remembered to say that. It's very true. It's very true when you have it's a great way for the news to get out there, for the information to get out there about the candidates. The other thing that I remember I didn't talk about with public-funded campaigns is that, unfortunately, there's only one entity in a jurisdiction in California that can do that, and that's charter cities. San Rafael happens to be one. Charter cities are like San Francisco, LA, Oakland, usually a larger kind, and those are allowed, the only ones allowed to do it. No other entity can't do it in the state government, can't do it in charter or unchartered counties, and certainly not unchartered cities. All of those are governed by the Constitution. And for that matter, I was doing some trolling on the internet, not about anybody here, but I just wanted to get this thing on voting initiative, referendum, and under the California Constitution. Section 1, all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their protection, security, and benefit, and they have the right to alter or reform it when the public good may require. And so the fact that people or persons, and persons, I mentioned persons because persons under the law can also be corporations, the fact that, or a committee for that matter. And I'll just divert here just for a quick second. A PAC, your campaign committee if you're an individual, it's tax exempt. If you think about it, they're all tax exempt because you're taking in income, you're raising money, but you're not paying taxes on it. It goes directly towards the campaign, and whether it's issues-based or it's an independent expenditure, whether it's the individual who is spending money to promote themselves, or even giving to another campaign, it is tax exempt. It's not tax deductible, which is different. Only C3s are. And C3 can be involved to a large extent in politics. C3s, you put money into your C3 and your inducement for doing that is a tax deduction, but then it has to be for education and research and a charity. And politics certainly is not that. So that helps you step back and see part of what politics is all about. The other thing that's interesting is that the ordinance for San Rafael specifically and for the county, which asks for disclosure, and probably for a lot of the MPPC, are all about what happens within the 90 days before an election. So if you put out a communication such as this within those 90 days, then you are subject to all the bureaucratic red tape that you have to follow within the 90 days. I don't know what happens before then, but I think that you can probably communicate things and probably not have them be part of a campaign. But I'm not too sure. Don't quote me on that. So, like I said, IEs, like Lisa said, and I said, IEs are a very good way for getting information out to the people. You just cannot go recruit them on your own. Just can't do that.
So we could leave it open for questions, I guess? I know you guys must be exhausted. You've been here all day. Yes?
I just wanted to make a comment. One thing about, I worked on Shirley Zane's campaign and also Greg Brockbank's for City Council, and having these IEs out there, knowing that they were out there, allowed the candidates to have the luxury of running a very positive campaign and not have to take on the tough issues. Now, you don't always know that they're going to be there until, you don't know until they pop up. So, like in Susan Adams' campaign, we did have to do some comparison pieces like the Mazzoni Maloney, even though we also had the union doing negative and positive IEs. They didn't do it until later, and because Susan was being attacked by her opponent directly, she had to respond, and so that was why we did those pieces. So every race is different, but the IEs can really help the candidate keep to the high road.
Right, and the other thing about an IE is you should definitely not, you should have a response, because you will be asked about it, right? So you definitely want to be able to say, I appreciate that other people feel that the race is important, they want their message out there, but here's my message, and keep restating your message. I'm running a positive campaign. That's not what, I did not authorize that, so, you don't want to pull a David Rabbit, it is what it is. Well, he eventually came out and said, it is what it is, which is like not an endorsement of it, but not a, and to me that was like the worst possible way to respond to that. Certainly he can't be held responsible for what IE happens. On the other hand, that's your chance to, if you lose another opportunity, because there's a lot of focus on these IEs, to restate your own message, shame on you. And there's more baggage. I mean, you can win. Again, David Rabbit won the election, against Pam. But there's a lot of baggage that goes with that election. And so he's going to have to kind of work in some communities now to get back. And we're going to have him for breakfast at the Labor Council soon. But you should be ready to have your message or your response to the IE. Yeah, Greg.
Can I piggyback on that too? I completely agree with Dottie. It was very nice to be able to run a 100% clean campaign, not have to worry about anything hard-hitting, anything resembling negative, so we can say, hey, we ran a clean campaign, we had nothing to do with those independent expenditures. However, that doesn't excuse you in the minds of many people. Many people, it became the major issue of the campaign, I think, in the final weeks is, why aren't you taking responsibility for that? Then why aren't you denouncing that? Well, you're tainted because you didn't denounce the independent expenditures. Where, I was grateful for the independent expenditures. They were right. It was good. Jonathan said the firefighters. But, it's not completely, so that taint remains.
It can get thorny, but you know what? As far as I'm concerned, you can denounce it. I mean, my feelings would not have been hurt if Shirley, she didn't need to, but certainly, when you're doing an IE, you have control of the message, and your person doesn't have control of the message. And that's just true. I mean, I know a lot of people don't believe it, and they think you endorse it, and they think you, are saying that that's the message your campaign has. But really, as soon as we start to do an IE, we separate. I mean, if I'm on any committee, I generally get off any campaign committee. I don't even talk to the candidate. Towards the end, I was afraid to even talk to Shirley just because the other side gets so, they're looking to be able to accuse you of coordinating a campaign. And you don't want to give them any opportunity to do that. But I would, my feelings would not have been hurt if Shirley had said, well, I don't think they should be so hard on Sharon Wright. It wasn't that kind of a campaign for her either. But Greg certainly could have said that, and I think the firefighters would have understood.
That speaks to integrity. And 4 years ago, I've got two stories. 4 years ago, we were given 5 notebooks that the firefighters had compiled over the years. And we were able to distill it down to the essential issues, the ones that were really, really relevant. And there were issues out there and facts that had happened that we just left alone. They're actually documented in the paper. The other one is actually a more interesting story. I think because I had the reputation that I did, a year ago, I got a letter from a lawyer in the middle of the Muldonado campaign saying, stop making these phone calls that you're making. And I had no idea what they were talking about. So, and I had even thought about getting into the race at that point in terms of an IE. What it turns out, this was a union who was making phone calls to try and find out what things people would be concerned about in the Mazzoni Adams race, and they came out about a week or two later with a very hard-hitting independent expenditure on Mazzoni and her stance on education, I believe it was. And so they kept it up, and they kept it up. And so I ended up calling the people who did the IE saying, you got to stop it, it's too much. I think it's going to backfire. And here's other information that would be even better. By then it was too late. So I'm always concerned about about the number of issues in the campaign. You really have to diversify if you're doing an IE. It has to be something that is, it's very situational. There's really no hard and fast rules about what's going to work where. I just know that the larger you get, for example, people thought that I had a very big thing to do with the Murray campaign, a later donation to when he ran for state senate. If you look at the amount of IEs and the amount of money, it was about $1 million or so, close to $1.5 million. And I spent maybe $5,000 or $10,000, so the percentage is very small. But what we did get was, as Lisa said, we got front page coverage. You can't buy that kind of coverage. And so that's really gets you out front. If you can get that kind of coverage is from the newspapers. But luckily in this last issue that I'm working with Target, the newspaper came out against it. So it was a little easier working this time.
Okay, other questions?
I'd just like to make a point. I know Jonathan and I have talked about this several times, but on your publicly funding of abortion, of elections, I know only a charter city at this point can do it or be asked to do it, but we've got to have a funding source first of all. We can't just put it into place and say it'll come out of your general fund. It won't work because we need that money to pay for our firefighters and our just basic everyday things. So you've got to find me a funding source before I'll ever be for it, and I would absolutely love it to get some public funding in a race. I think it's great.
Which is why I haven't pushed on it.
I know, I understand.
So yeah, so it's I recognize that as well. The other way to go for public funding campaigns is through a lawsuit, and there's been some talk about that, but that's a big, huge organizing effort, and you either go after the propositions that are now 20-some-odd years old, or else you try to find an enlightened city like San Rafael who would, or county that would actually sponsor it, be willing to get sued to handle the lawsuit, which would then which would overturn it. But that's again have to be something that would be funded, and I think we may have a large law firm interested in doing that because it would be a really good thing to do. But then again, it's a huge organizational effort. And so, for the exact same reason Barbara talks about, I've not been pushing on this because I recognize the cash flow problem that we have in government and everywhere as well.
Yeah, and the two examples I've looked at in Arizona, where they have publicly funding of the legislature, they do not fund the municipals. They have a completely separate funding source and a whole department to take care of that. And then I know Portland, also a city took them millions of dollars out of their general funds. I do not know if they are still funding publicly or not, but they had to put in a new department and more help in one of their, I think the clerk's office. So you got to look at those unintended consequences no matter how good it is. At this point in government, there just is no extra money for anything like that.
There was a couple other questions before we end. No?
I just wanted to bring up one thing, that's sort of the negative aspect of these independent expenditures from the candidate's point of view. When they start coming and they start landing in people's mailboxes the same day that your mail does, and sometimes they're like what Jonathan was talking about in Susan's campaign, they were kind of coming fast and furious. And we were getting a lot of calls. How come you're sending us so much mail?
Yeah.
And so it was...
UHW went a little overboard in that, I heard.
We had to contend with that.
Right, but it actually shows that you don't coordinate. I mean, and the same is true of phoning. And phoning, every time we phone, we've done, last election we did 20,000 calls. So we phone people more than once. You get to people that are like, why did you calling? You just called me. People don't differentiate between the Democratic Party calling them, their labor union calling them, and you always get people that are like, oh, we got to stop calling. Whenever people start saying we got to stop calling, that's when you're getting your message out. You don't stop, you just keep going through, because then you will have saturated and done all the calling. And it's better to have, something in your script saying, oh, we apologize, it's just so important, and, and there's quite a few people calling because this race is very important and your vote is important. There's ways to handle it that don't turn voters off. You'll always have the voter who say, I was going to vote for you, but now since you called me this time, that's bullshit. Those people aren't going to vote for you. It's better to over-call than under-call, definitely. With mail, it's a little different. I mean, the thing about a campaign, and everybody wants to say campaign is like math, that you so many votes and so much money. So a campaign is not like math. It is like theater, because you can have a great performance, you have a great start, you can have a great book, great plot. Something goes wrong with the audience, it doesn't mesh, and you lose. There's no, but at the same time you can have not a real thin story, low production values, but for some reason, whether it's the candidate or the audience, there's something that happens between the people that are talking, and that can make a really great campaign. It just explodes. So there's no way of if you do this, then this won't happen. If you do that, that won't happen. People want that kind of surety in a campaign, but it's really not. What you have to be, I think that the most important thing is to be flexible, to be able to pivot off a hard question, to know your message and stay on your message and have a good message, and then to be able to ask people who have expertise that you don't, have resources that can help you, and ask them for the help. The older we get, the more our lives become about masking what we don't know than learning what we know. And so we all try to pretend we know stuff that we don't know. But you will learn so much more by just asking. And then, of course, money, too. I have to say, Shirley calls the other thing you get when you're supported by labor unions, you get our directory, and you can call people. And we urge all of our locals to donate to candidates, not just workers, but also money. And I swear to God, I got so many calls from people and locals. Shirley's asking me for money again. I just gave her money. She wants more money. I said, you know what? Thank you. That's good. That's what she should be doing. That's the kind of candidate I want, is someone who calls. And I don't care that you don't want to hear from her. She's going to keep calling you. I'm going to tell her to keep calling you. And I mean, Shirley, basically, I told her, until people see you and run away in the opposite direction. No, I'm not going to give you any more. I don't have money. But same thing with Michael Allen. Michael was our assembly candidate. He ran for city council and lost. Thank God, now that I look back, in Santa Rosa. And he did not quit. He decided to run for assembly. It was a very tough race, but it was a priority for us. And he won, and is now assemblyman. But same thing. He would sit down literally for 3 hours and just dial for dollars. And it sucks. It's hard. He was like, I feel like a hooker. I was like, he's like, I'm just so tired of asking people for money. I said, I'm tired of asking people for money on your behalf as well. But it doesn't matter. You need that. And unfortunately, or fortunately, people will not give you money unless you ask them. And even then, they won't. I mean, my only experience in asking for money was with my parents, and I got very good at it. And that helps when, I also was trained at the ACLU, when I worked with the ACLU, how to ask for money. They have one of the best development programs there. But you cannot give it up just because you're bad at it. You'll get better. And you'll get better at being rejected, and you'll get better at being hurt and all that. But you definitely don't stop just because it's uncomfortable.
Can I just make one last comment?
Sure.
Democratic candidates often get hit as being tools of labor unions. And I just thought of a response that I had to give it a couple days ago for the first time to the head of Federation of Santa Fe Neighborhoods, who said that exact line. It is true, first of all, that Republicans, by and large, are tools of corporations. A huge percentage of their campaign funds come from corporations or corporation-backed, corporation executives, et cetera. But always we should say, no, it's not true. If you look at any candidate's filings, you will find that only a small percentage of their campaign funds come from unions. There's only a few exceptions to that. I happen to be one. It was more than a few percent. But most of the time, most candidates are not funded to a large extent by, so it's not true that we're union tools in any respect. And you're going to get that a lot. We're going to have to fight that more and more because the Republicans are using that more and more.
They do use that. And, they will call us labor thugs. They'll call people, tools of the union. They called Shirley, poor Shirley, they did a negative of her as a puppet. Oh, it just killed her. She was so upset. It was her as a puppet of the union. But I have to say, Shirley had one of the best, in terms of a candidate, she came through that, and she won really big. What were her numbers, Donnie?
I can't remember, but yeah, it was big.
It was a big win over Sharon Wright, who was the favored business candidate. But Shirley embraced the union thing. She was like, I am proud to be supporting working families. Working families do most of the paying of the bills, they pay the taxes, they are what keep our community strong. I will not back away from that, and I'm not ashamed to say that those are the people that I care about, you know. You know, it's all, you know, obviously, and it's kind of stupid, but a lot of it is language and how you package it. And people will say union, and you get an idea in your head, and it's, you know, what, Jimmy Hoffa or something. But when you talk about working families, which is what most of us are, okay? I mean, I know they like to say that everybody's making all this money, but believe me, you know, it's working people. There's nothing wrong with that. We should have a voice in politics. We have every right to participate in politics, especially given that right now, the same people, like Sharon Ryan, will take money from developers, you know, big constructions, what we call scab constructors, who use, this is what irritated me the most about the Alliance's hit piece on Pam Torlia, and because it was about undocumented immigrants. So many of the contractors and the vineyard owners that are, you know, belong to the Alliance and paid for that mailer to call her a sanctuary supporter, use undocumented immigrants in their construction business, use them in the vineyards, and it's the hypocrisy, you know. But this is why you need to be a fighter, because you will be attacked for stuff, and you need to be confident and sure of your convictions. And, you know, if you don't have the right language, if you don't have the verbiage, if you don't have what you need, talk to us. We'll make the argument for you. Believe me, all of the unions, this is what we do. You know, we fight for our rights constantly, it seems like, for the last 100 years. And probably for the next couple 100 years we'll be doing it. So we're happy to train it, but you do have to have, people can smell fear on you as a candidate and uncertainty on you as a candidate. It's better to have people disagree with you. And this is one of the things I've seen Shirley navigate really well. She actually navigated much better than Pam, I thought, as a candidate, which is that people would rather have you be honest and disagree with you than sense that you're giving them a load of bullshit and you're, you know, fronting stuff that you don't believe in. It's kind of bizarre, but there's the authenticity piece. And, you know, you just, it's better to just be thought, well, I disagree with her, I don't like her stand on that, than have people feel like, I don't trust what she's saying, she's bullshitting, you know, because we all have a bullshit detector, and when it comes to politics, there's a lot of it out there. So I'd much rather have an authentic candidate and disagree.
Talk about money in politics in this desk here. In Al's desk, there's his $1,000 made in China.
That's funny.
Thank you, our target.
That's how rumors start, man.
Thank you very much for, you have any other questions? Thanks so much for staying the whole afternoon. It's great. Really.